With Bitcoin's next halving expected in the coming days, many investors are wondering if they will see a similar windfall to the ones that they saw in previous halvings, where Bitcoin's price skyrocketed over the following months. But this time, is it going to be different? Let's ask Dan Dolev. He is Mizuho Securities Managing Director. Dan, it's great to see you. So talk to us just about what you think, at least starting with the halving, before we get to your thoughts more broadly about Bitcoin. But starting with the halving, what kind of impact do you see that having on the price of Bitcoin?
Hi, thanks for having me. Look, I think this time is different, right? Interest rates are higher. It's sort of, third time's a charm. People kind of know it's happening much more than they did in the prior cycles. And I think all the upside that you saw heading into the last few weeks pre the downturn show you that we're kind of already fully pricing it in. So I actually expect more downside than upside at this point.
Okay, and downside at this juncture, I mean, where else do you think that this could actually transpire and have a broader ripple effect across crypto as well? Because if there is more downside in this event here, then that is going to take some of the enthusiasm out of the rest of the crypto landscape.
100%. So, my concern is mostly with Coinbase, where I have an underperform. And if you think about what happened with Bitcoin, it actually started this whole wave of altcoins, right? That's kind of a nice way to call them. And they're traded, at parity or when Bitcoin volumes go up, then the altcoin volumes go up and Coinbase makes a lot of money off of the altcoin. So if Bitcoin continues to lose momentum, this is going to drag down all these altcoins. And then eventually when people start losing money, which they haven't until now, they're going to be more cautious on pricing. And I expect, spread contraction on the retail side to happen, and that's kind of my bearish view on Coinbase. So I agree with the ripple effect. It's going to be pretty bad when it unravels.
Do you think that's going to be immediate, Dan?
I think we're already in it right now. I mean, you saw, the best example is the last weekend, right? Geopolitical concerns. Bitcoin was perceived as sort of a safe haven, and it wasn't. It actually traded down significantly on the Israel-Iran situation. So I do think that we're already in this sort of Bitcoin bear market, and it's starting to happen, these days.
Dan, how do you see it unraveling? Or how are we in the unraveling right now that you were talking about, especially if we're just coming off of some of these new all-time highs, and the halvening is expected to create even more all-time highs coming off of the typical valuation or the typical value moves that we've seen after previous cycles?
Because everyone knows about it now, right? Like the publicity that, the halvening has right now is, multiples of what it was in the last cycle and definitely like 2 cycles ago. So everyone traded or the Bitcoin was already fully pricing, and it's kind of a sell the news event at this point. So I think that once the event actually happens, there's going to be a running for the exit. So that's what I said in this sort of third time's a charm. People have gotten used to it. The anticipation was so big, and people were drumming on the event, and now it's kind of like heading the other way. So I see this like significant sell the news, catalyst coming in the next couple of weeks. But again, my concern is mostly with Coinbase. Bitcoin is obviously a huge driver of this, so I kind of have to follow what's going on with Bitcoin.
Yeah, that is a good point to make. The one thing I will say to counter it is also talking about why it's a bit different this time is because we have the Bitcoin ETFs, more institutional involvement. Is that going to buoy the losses then at all to the downside, or maybe the immediate risk to the downside that we are seeing at all, given the fact that it is backed by institutions and a bit more, I think investors are a bit more comfortable maybe now compared investing in Bitcoin than they were just a few months ago?
Exactly. I think that the swing effect here, because the lever is just so much bigger and there's so much more involvement. If you have this sort of running, to the exit, there's going to be a stampede in Bitcoin just because there's so much ETF and equities kind of tied to it right now, which I think is the embedded risk with this whole so-called asset category, which I think is silly to begin with, but doesn't matter what I think.
totally does, Dan. I mean, we value your insights and your perspective here. You know, one of the huge, I think, frames of mind as well is what this is going to mean for the miners out there. And I'm not sure if that's in your coverage universe. I know that we've talked at length about Coinbase in the past and some of the other crypto-touching platforms, but the miners have been looked at by some investors as, and as I was tracking them yesterday, all of them are down at least like 30, 40% over the course of this year, with the anticipation of the halving driving up costs for them. But does that make them potential kind of acquisition targets by some of the larger firms?
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't follow them.
Yeah.
Definitely not very closely. I really don't know. I think, yeah, it depends if the future for Bitcoin changes dramatically, if there's a kind of a paradigm shift over the next few weeks, then why would anyone be interested? You know, you're seeing some of those predictions by some of my counterparts. I think they're invented, right? Like, I mean, give me one use case of Bitcoin. Why do you need it? You don't really need it, right? So, I mean, you have to have a point of view on Bitcoin, right? So I think it's in I don't know how your Yiddish is, but I think it's babkis.
Dan, thanks so much for taking the time as always. Really appreciate. I would love to know what that chart is behind you as well. We'll leave that for another conversation. Yeah.
This is my Bitcoin prediction chart.
Okay.
There we go. We should have started with that, Dan.
I know, right?
Summed it up pretty quickly.
The ruler is from the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Take a step to your right.
Dan,
Going down
always a
Mizuho.
pleasure speaking with you. Thanks so much for giving us some time and insights here. Dan Dolev, Mizuho Securities Managing Director. Good to see you.